friendships can be hard, and for some, one-night stands and spontaneous meetups can be full of risk. That's why today's sponsor, Tantally, has come to the rescue. Yes, folks, Tantally has taken it upon themselves to open up a new world of both passions and pleasures. Made with food-grade TPE material and sporting the softest and most realistic skin textures, Tantally promises to give you an experience beyond your wildest imaginations. Tantally offers 100% discreet packaging and free shipping in over 30 countries. Use our link in the description below and you'll receive 12% off your order when you use code SPLATTER12. Huge thanks to Tantally for sponsoring this video. Now, let's get back to it.
Good evening, campers, dreamers, and babysitters. Yes, another week, another list coming your way. This time, diving into the supernatural. Yes, this one was an interesting pick for me. I had it on my list of things to do. And I gotta be honest, the supernatural ghost story subgenre kind of falls in line with a little bit of the religious horror as well. Never my favorite. I think there are only a handful of films that are really done great. And then a lot of the other ones are just kind of copycats, and they take those familiar beats and don't really do too many unique things. And I think it's probably a layup to do just a modern telling of a ghost story and throw it out there and see what sticks. And I think a lot of times we get that more often than not. So I wanted to take a look. I wanted to do a deeper dive into some supernatural ghost stories that have really worked for me over the past years and just revisit those and see if they still hold up. So this one was a bit of an interesting deep dive, more so than the other ones that I've done, just because I have an absolute love for some of the things that I've covered already. And this one, I just wanted to rekindle my love for ghost stories. And I will say, with 5 picks here on this list, they've certainly done that. I even have a couple other ones that didn't make this list as well. So I certainly did have a fun go of it, deep diving into some ghost stories. But without further ado, let's hop into 5 terrifying ghost stories that will haunt you. Kicking us off in that number 5 spot, GONJIAM, Haunted Asylum. The crew of a horror web series travels to an abandoned asylum for a live broadcast. They soon encounter much more than expected as they move deeper inside the nightmarish old building. This is a South Korean film, and it has some pretty basic concepts when it comes to the supernatural ghost story. A film crew goes into an abandoned, supposedly haunted psychiatric hospital as they plan to do a live stream and uncover if the place is actually haunted or not. This film does take a minute to dive into the supernatural elements, which is why it appears at the number 5 spot. While it does take a minute to peel back those supernatural elements, when we do arrive at those moments of terror, I had a lot of fun with what they give us. The atmosphere in the asylum itself has an eeriness that complements that found footage style of which the story's told. Using the found footage aspect really allows you to get invested in those moments of terror and makes you feel like you're part of what is going on with the characters. A lot of South Korean films find unique avenues to tell stories. While I don't think this really goes down any of those unique routes, I think the relatability here is being those social media influencers, and that's why the story works so well. When I first watched this flick, I immediately thought of the old MTV show Fear from the early 2000s. Watching that show and seeing this film, I was able to draw a lot of parallels, making this both a fun watch, but really amplifying those moments of terror we're subjected to just because of how the film is shot. We are with our characters in the asylum as they uncover different aspects of the lore surrounding the building's history. Each crew member wears a body camera showing their POV, but also their close-up reactions as well, so it really gives this idea of intimacy when we're going through these moments of horror and terror. At times, we get these extreme close-ups of our characters as they're reacting to certain situations, and it really allows us to lose ourselves in the moments of horror. But they also give us these moments of great suspense because they also use other CCTV camera angles that are way wider. So as you're watching this, and there's nothing really going on in terms of the supernatural, because of this wide lens, we're really looking in the background searching for any figures or entities in those moments where nothing is seemingly happening. Even though the film does take a minute to get to those real horror elements, when it finally does, it keeps amping up that tension to the very end. From a character perspective, I would say there really aren't many characters to latch onto here. You don't really feel emotionally invested. And it kind of gives you that familiar feeling that you have with the slasher subgenre, when you're just kind of waiting for these characters to be killed in some sort of gruesome way. I didn't find any of them overly annoying. They're just kind of there, and I was waiting for them to get into those horror elements just to see how they were all going to meet their demise. There is an absolutely haunting scene near the closing of the film. It's being shot in night vision, and it really does amp up the intensity and the style and really puts the exclamation point on this film. This one isn't really breaking down any barriers or uncovering any new territory for supernatural films, but it is giving us those familiar elements from these films that we do love, and they're done to perfection in this flick. This one is on Tubi right now and is a breeze to get through. Digging up the number 4 spot, Stir of Echoes. A man is hypnotized by his sister-in-law and soon has visions of a ghost of a girl. The more he digs, the more he lets her in, and the shocking truth behind her death puts his whole family in danger. This has been one of my favorite ghost stories since its release in 1999. And a film I always go back to when I want a good scare. I remember renting this on VHS, and it absolutely terrified me as a kid. Even revisiting as an adult, there are still some scenes in here that give me chills. Kevin Bacon plays Tom, this blue-collar dad who is skeptical of the supernatural, but once he's hypnotized, everything changes as he opens up this new doorway in his brain. This film still feels so modern even though it was released in 1999. Tom and his wife Maggie, played by Catherine Irby, have a much different dynamic in their relationship than what we typically see. They come off as this much more youthful couple, and it really adds to the realism of the story, especially as the supernatural dynamic heightens and the stress it puts on their relationship at times. Using the busy New York life as the setting for this story really gives us a different feel and tone than what we usually see with the typical white picket fence, Midwestern ghost story in a lot of other films. The underlying story that is the root of the supernatural tale is absolutely heartbreaking, and no matter how many times I watch this film, I still get so tense knowing what is coming. Another great performance in this film is from Zachary David Cope, who's the young son of the couple Jake. The film opens up with Jake seemingly talking to no one, but we quickly realize that he is also in tune with the supernatural world, and some of his interactions with some ghosts and apparitions provide some of the best terror in this film. Watching Jake interact with a ghost that no one can see but we as an audience get a couple glimpses of makes us tense, and it is so well crafted. We maintain that tension throughout the entire film. Kevin Bacon's performance in this really shows why his career has lasted decades upon decades. He becomes so in tune with this world, and his psyche seemingly starts to crack as these hauntings and visions increase in frequency and intention. Tom has this vision at one point regarding one of the neighbors that, when I watched this as a kid, has to be one of the most unsettling scenes in my childhood, and honestly hasn't gotten any better as an adult. During the release of Stir of Echoes, it really did get steamrolled by The Sixth Sense, since it was a much bigger film at the time. But this one is becoming much more of a talking point in the horror community. From its characters to its atmosphere and its just basic supernatural story, this film has to be uncovered by more horror fans. You can actually check this one out on Tubi as well. Picking up the number 3 spot, Lake Mungo. After a young girl, Alice, drowns while swimming, her family begins experiencing unexplained events in their home. This is such a different take on a ghost story, and the approach in Lake Mungo is very unique, which has ensured its staying power in the subgenre. This one took me a while to cross off my watch list, but a recommendation from our boy Evan at Rockin' and Graves finally got me to check this one out. This is an Australian flick, and recently I did a list covering a lot of Australian films and basically gushing over their storytelling, and I gotta be honest, Lake Mungo fits right in there with that quality. Being told in a mockumentary style with interviews from the family, seeing old home videos from our characters, and new videos of the incidents really give us a sense of realism here. One of the reasons this film really hit with me was its style. As I was watching Lake Mungo, I got flashbacks to watching the show Unsolved Mysteries as a kid. The television show had a similar tone of storytelling where you aren't really seeing too much, just enough to let your mind connect the dots and keep you up at night. Lake Mungo shares that similar DNA, not giving you too many details or visuals when we dive into the paranormal. From a direction standpoint, Joel Anderson really went with the less is more approach for the ghost story, and some of the images in the film actually gave me chills, which doesn't happen often. Typically in these ghost stories, one of the big selling points of a lot of supernatural films is how well the entity looks, but Anderson didn't rely on that element here with Lake Mungo. Crafting the story with a handful of twists and turns was a real unexpected surprise from from the narrative here. Going in, I thought it'd be a pretty basic story, but the ground we covered is heartbreaking and eerie. This film really does take its time when it's laying out the narrative, but it never feels slow from a pacing standpoint. We do bring in so many different elements towards Alice's life and what is exactly going on, that yes, we're watching a supernatural flick, but those elements in the narrative that is also being unveiled is rather intriguing as well. But then once we get engaged in those elements, Joel Anderson brings us right back into the looming dread of the story as we uncover every aspect while sprinkling in these haunting visuals in every instance. While we aren't being bombarded with one horrific or terrifying image after another, when Anderson does decide to use that imagery, he uses it in a very methodical way, slowly zooming in on still images to unveil an aspect, to create tension, or pausing on a glimpse of footage of the supernatural, imposes a subtle fear that is going to last even after viewing this film. Lake Mungo is streaming on Tubi right now, so add it to the watch list. Reflecting in on the number 2 spot, Oculus. A recently released inmate from a mental asylum learns from his sister that the murders he was convicted of committing were actually orchestrated by a supernatural entity, the Lasser Glass Mirror. This was a bit of a complicated watch my first go-around. Not really knowing the narrative or how the story was going to be told, I tried to give it a passive watch, and then coming in and out of the actual film itself and realizing Flanagan had crafted a story that really does require your complete attention did give me an underwhelming experience the first time around. Once I sat down and got fully engaged in the story structure and how it builds to a perfect symphony of tension, I was really able to appreciate the craftsmanship that goes into the film Oculus. Karen Gillian and Brenton Thwaites play siblings Kaylee and Tim Russell, who are reconnecting after Tim's recent incarceration. The character work between both these actors is such a great framework for the story and really adds a lot of tension to this claustrophobic tale. Both Karen and Tim are dealing with the same traumatic event when it comes to the Lasser Glass Mirror, but one has become more of a skeptic about the actual events and how those actually went down, and the other has been fully invested in the supernatural explanation behind the mirror. As we ease into the deeper and darker elements of the story, both Kim and Taryn play off each other so well with the belief-disbelief elements of the events. Flanagan's narrative fully immerses the audience. The editing techniques used to tell and retell the events almost simultaneously creates such a masterpiece of tension, but also frustrates your mind in a way that it kind of provokes your emotions to heighten to the levels of the characters that we're watching. The story structure is such a big portion of why this film stands out from other mundane ghost stories and really shows the necessity of good pacing when telling these types of stories. The only real criticism I have of the film is some of the supernatural elements just feel a little too stylish from what I was looking for. While the design isn't downright bad or anything, I do find it a little distracting at times. Combining elements of past and present and intertwining those stories to build that tension is really where this film excels. While all the supernatural designs don't work for me 100%, the real gruesome imagery that stuck with me is when we dive into the mother story. It does really produce some harrowing scenes. This one is on Amazon Prime as well as Plex, so if you haven't, check out one of Mike Flanagan's masterpieces. Creeping into the number 1 spot, Terrified. When strange events occur in a neighborhood in Buenos Aires, a doctor specializing in the paranormal, her colleague, and an ex-police officer decide to investigate further. Being able to harness what makes a ghost story tense, unique, and bring the terror audiences want is a tough task in the modern horror community. Demian Rugna was able to do that with Terrified, creating some moments that both feel reminiscent of past great films in the subgenre, but approaching them in a way that doesn't feel redundant. After checking out When Evil Lurks, which was my first experience with Rugna, I was completely enamored with that film and what it adds to the genre, so I knew I had to experience Terrified for myself. I didn't know much about this film other than its brief log line, but as soon as we get through that opening sequence, this is a film that's going to put you in its chokehold for its runtime. Rugna offers just enough of the story to not over-explain anything, but just enough to feel fully engaged and knock you on your ass with some fun jump scares. There were a handful of fun jump scares that actually got me, but one in particular has to do with one of our main characters looking out a window toward another house. I know it doesn't sound like much. I don't want to go into spoilers, but if you haven't seen this, the way I'm explaining it just seems rather bland, but the way they build up to it, those tense moments, and then when it finally hits you in your face, it will get you 100%. I've watched this a handful of times now, and I will say a lot of the jump scares still get me, which is a testament to how well crafted they are throughout this film. Even in the beginning, we have a character that's just listening to a sink drain as something whispers. The tension there is so evident from just a bubble in the sink and the meaning behind it. It really shows how much of a master Rugna is in the horror genre. With the abundance of tension and crisp pacing throughout this film, it finds this perfect stride for a ghost story, giving you those what the fuck moments followed by an intense scare. Now this is a smaller budgeted film and does use some CGI, and typically when we're talking about smaller budgeted films, a lot of the CGI does suffer just because they don't have the budget. And looking at Terrified, I will say a lot of the CGI doesn't work for me, and even though that portion isn't the best in this film, it is only used when necessary, so it isn't as jarring or unforgivable as a lot of other films that have a tendency to overuse it or use it needlessly. This one, Rugna understands that it's probably not the best, but we do need to get from one aspect to the next, so he does use it in very effective ways. From its gore to the well-crafted scenes and the overall somber atmosphere, this film is one of the best ghost stories told over the last decade. You can check this one out on Shudder right now, and if you haven't seen it before, this is easily worth a month subscription. And there we have it, ladies and gentlemen, 5 terrifying ghost movies that will haunt you forever. I know they've been haunting me for a little bit since composing this list. I'll say after seeing Terrified, I've got to keep checking under my bed, even leaving my closet door open. That one just does not sit right with me. And even like Mungo, that one, being able to cross that one off my watch list, and it really does sit with you. There's some imagery in that one, just the storytelling in general. I understand why that is such a gem in the horror community. It was a lot of fun to get into some of these more unique ghost stories and really see the potential that is out there. So sometimes when you go to the theater and you see one ghost story after another and nothing unique, there are a bunch out there that a lot of creatives are tackling, even some that didn't make this list that maybe I'll compile for another one down the line, because there are a lot of unique takes out there. And this was a lot of fun. Yeah, I'm always eager to revisit these lists, so if you have any interesting takes, leave them in the comments below. I will be reading those. I'll try to respond best I can. Dylan and I are hopefully moving toward doing this full-time, as we are almost crossing 40,000 here. We are getting there, trucking along. A lot more coming your way. A lot of great reviews up last week, Dylan's list as well. And a lot more coming your way. We have a lot of things in the works, a couple festivals on the horizon. We're going to see if we're going to be able to tackle those or not. And of course, we're always keeping it fresh here with a lot of different screeners and just what is coming out. So it looks like we're going to have a busy week this week as well. Leave some comments, let us know your thoughts. But until then, I'm Luke Janesco, and stay scared.
Do the horse shit, gonna do it live, 'cause Splattercast kick it. Every day they live. Splattercast, gonna smash your ass. 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 Splattercast, gonna smash your ass.